In 1986. Yeah. Someone's reliving the good old days back there. Okay. In 1986, Japan invented something called the Nintendo Entertainment System. Actually, they invented it a couple years before it, but they sent it to the United States in 86. And this revolutionized video games for anyone that was a fan of video games. It moved from the Atari to 8 bits. I don't even know what that means, of graphics and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, I didn't get a Nintendo until in 1988, 2 years later. But the kid that lived catty-cornered behind me, a young man that moved to the United States from the island of Pohnpei. Anyone know where Pohnpei is? It's in the Federated States of Micronesia. Anyone know where that is? It's in the Pacific Ocean somewhere. Well, I guess young boys that are born in the Pacific get everything they want because he had a Nintendo Entertainment System. And since we didn't have one, we would go over to his house. And we would wait for our turn to play the Nintendo. We waited, and we waited. And 35 years later, I'm here today. We're still waiting. We didn't get to play it too often. He played it. And ultimately, it was his. So he gets to choose who can play it, who doesn't get to play it. It belonged to him. And he has that right. And we can choose to accept it. We can choose to get mad at him. I guess we could have stolen it if we wanted to and played it ourselves. Or we can just talk badly about him. Or we can ignore it and not even go and see our friend down the street. Last week I talked about creation. And I talked about how God has created everything. Everything we see in this world belongs to God, and we have responsibility to use this world and everything in it, making sure we know God owns it fully. And with that, some of you, probably a lot of you that are in church, would say, well, yes, that's God's world. This is my Father's world. It's His choice of how we live in it. It's His choice of what we're allowed to have. Some people steal from our Father's world. They take away. They act as if everything we have in this world is ours, even though it belongs to God. God created it. And then some of us just choose to ignore God altogether. And we live in God's world, but we think it's our own. Or we don't acknowledge it as God's world. Some people think, well, why does He have the right to tell us what to do with His world? And what's interesting about our God, in so many ways, is our God is not like the young man that lived catty-corner to me, that has this nice game system, or a God that has this incredible universe that He keeps all to Himself. We have a God that wants to invite us in to His creation. We have a God that doesn't just stand by idly and say, just follow everything I do, and then I'm going to leave you. But we have a God that's with us and wants us to be part of the creation that He's made. This incredible world. And I want us to look at exactly what God has done in creation, and how much it shows that God not only wants to create things, but He wants creation to create things on its own. Look at what it says in Genesis chapter 1, verse 11. It says, "Then God said, 'Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees, and the land bears fruit with seeds in it, according to its various kind.' And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plant-bearing seeds according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruits with seeds according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. There was evening and morning the third day." You see, what did God do? God didn't just say, "Let there be fruit on the trees." God had creation form the fruit. God had creation do the act of creation. And it wasn't a one-time thing. From the moment that God spoke light into this world and spoke to the land to create things, it's continuing in this creation. Have you thought about it? We think of the 7 days, the 6 days of creation, then God rests on the seventh day, and then creation's done. But that's not the case. Creation continues. It's dynamic. It unfolds every day. We have seasons: the spring, summer, fall, winter, and it goes in this cycle. But it's not just creation continuing to create, and creation having all the ability for creating new things. God has something special for humanity. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, it reads, "Then God said, 'Let us make mankind in our own image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky, over the livestock and all the animals, over all the creatures that are moving on the ground.' And so God created mankind in His image, His own image. In the image of God, He created them, male and female. He created them. God blessed them and said to them, 'Be fruitful, increase in number, fill the earth, subdue it, rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground.'" Look at what God has done. He's created this world, and then He creates mankind in His own image. He says, "Let us create mankind in our image." And what is that telling us? For the longest time, I thought all that meant was that God is He's talking with Jesus. As we know the New Testament, everything is created through Jesus. And so whenever you hear that, "Let us create man in our image," it's this idea that, well, Jesus is there in creation. Even from the beginning, we see that. The Spirit is hovering over the waters through creation. We see that. But by using the word "our image," I think God is also including us. This is a God that wants to be near to us. This is a God that wants to have a relationship with us. The image that we share is shared between us and God. And so it makes something a little bit different than the rest of creation. We're a little bit more special. God has addressed mankind, men and women, male and female. And He's created us in His image. I've told y'all this before, but my freshman year of high school, I was in the one-act play. I did it 3 years in high school. But my freshman year, I had a very small role. I had one line. But with that one line, I won all-star cast whenever we went to district. And for you today, I will deliver that line. Are y'all ready for this? I was a cowboy. I had the job of walking into the door and shivering because it was cold outside, supposedly. I would sit at my table and I would sip coffee and I would strum a guitar, but I wouldn't really strum it because I don't know how to play the guitar. And then I delivered my award-winning line, "No bow, no." No applause? That was all-star cast right there. The judge at the end said, "You did the perfect job of doing nothing." And so I thought, that's the way I want to live my life. Sip coffee, act like I'm strumming a guitar, and do nothing. And everyone will praise me for that, although y'all didn't clap after that, so I guess I've lost it. I wasn't the main character in the play, and our main character wasn't very good, and so we didn't advance to the next round. In social media today, there is something where people will do these trends on social media, these little dances, or they'll do these things, and if someone's really standing out, they'll say, "That's the main character." And what we see in creation, humans are the main character. We're made in the image of God. We're given this job to rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and the land, the animals that roam on the land. We are the main character because we are created in God's image. And so God can address us like no other creature. He can speak to us and He can give us laws and He can give us blessings. But as the main character, we are also called to be accountable to God. So it's not that God just blesses us, but God expects something of us. Not just His people, not just church-going people, but everyone in this world is accountable to God, and we are called to respond to God in a way that reflects our image, being made in God's likeness. Because of humanity has been given this special role, everyone in humanity, every single human being has been given dignity by God. No matter their age, their race, their nationality, their social status, everyone's been given this dignity by God. And so if we are to respond to God, we are accountable to see everyone as God's creation, made in God's image. And what does it mean to be made in the image of God? In Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, it says, "Then the Lord God formed man of the dust on the ground, and He breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And man became a living creature." He spoke a lot of things into existence, and then the earth created things into existence. But God breathed into man, which is very intimate, right? It's very special. To be made in the image of God means that we have responsibility. Responsibility that God has for us to follow. God is a God of justice. God is a God of mercy. God is a God that cares for creation, and He calls us to be like Him in that image. Following Him in that way. To be in the image of God, we should recognize who our God is. A God that created this vast universe. I was reading last night, it talks about how many galaxies are in this world. If you look out there into the sky, and with all the technology we have, we can look, and there's trillions of planets and galaxies and all this stuff. And I wonder, why did God create something so big, so vast? Because that's who God is. He wants us to look up into the sky and say, I can't even comprehend how vast our universe is. And that's a God that creates it. We can't even comprehend how big our God is. And yet, with this big God, He centers His love to us. And our response should be obedience to His Word. Our response should be worship of this incredible God. Our response should be stewardship and being responsible for all the things that He's entrusted us with. Our response should be exactly what Jesus Christ was as He came to this world and He cared for others. He spent time with God. He spent time with the outcasts. He gave dignity to all of God's people. And we're called to be like Him. We're called to live this life on mission, reaching out to others. God has told us to go into the world. He's told us to multiply. He's told us to populate this world. And when we think about that, it's in some ways we populate this world through family. We populate this world by getting married, having a spouse. But we also populate this world and we show people that they're created in the image of God by going out and living a mission, evangelizing, telling people about our God. How incredible He was. But to do this, we're called not to do it alone. In all of creation, if you look at all the first chapter of creation, what you see is God has created something and He says what? It is good. But do you realize God created something and He said, well, this is not good. There is something in there where He said, this is not good. And that's when you get a more intimate look at creation in chapter 2. And it's about the relationship between God and man. And He sees that Adam was created, but not everything was good. He says, it's not good that man should be alone. I'm going to make a helper fit for him. When we think about that idea, what exactly a helper is, you might think that if someone puts a sign on outside of a restaurant saying, we need some help, we need some kitchen help, it would be kind of a subordinate role. But the word that is used for helper is ezar. And it's the same word that you'll see in Psalm chapter 33, verse 20. It says, we wait and hope for the Lord. He is our ezer, our help, our shield. A helper isn't simply just someone that provides company. A helper is something that gives strength to fulfill a mission. And man has been given this enormous mission. This mission to go populate the world. This mission to subdue the world, to take care of the world. This mission to reach out to others. And He calls us not to do it alone. Mission requires partnership. That's why He says, be fruitful, multiply. And then in the New Testament, Paul helps us to understand that that's not just about a man and a wife, but that's the church. Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 12 through 27, he talks about the church, and he says the church is like a body. It's made up of many different parts. But each part is essential to the mission of God. Each part is essential to helping each other as we go through this world. The church was never meant to just be something where we come and we check off our list and we go home and then we wait for the next week to get back. The church is a response to God. And it's an active relationship with God. If we respond to God and when we see His creation, we see everything He's done, our response should be something where we see this incredible God and we want to have a deeper relationship with Him. And so how do we do that? We go into prayer. God calls us to pray to Him. And prayer is not just a ritual that we do before meals or maybe when we go to bed. Prayer is a conversation with the God of this world. When we open up a relationship with God, we realize just as creation wasn't done on day 6, and it continues on, our prayer life, our faith doesn't end after we've given our life to Christ. And our response isn't just to have a relationship with God, but it's to have deep relationship with one another. And that's where the church comes into play. We know what's going on in each other's life. We see when each other are hurting. We see when each other are rejoicing. And we live life with others. It's a deep relationship where we're present with those around us. And are responding to God, and when we see God in creation, it means that we are open to growth and change in our life. Just as creation wasn't finished, plants still need to bear fruit. We're called to continue and growing in our faith. Faith isn't a one-time choice. When we've been baptized into Christ and we raised in His resurrection, it doesn't end there. We grow. I was talking with someone this week about Brother Eddie DeLong. I don't know if you remember Eddie DeLong, but he would come here every week about 10 years ago. He was 80 years old, and he would preach at this little country church, and he wanted to have the best PowerPoint available. And after you get to a certain age, sometimes technology gets a little bit difficult. And so I would help him get his PowerPoints together, and he wanted to do as good of a job, and he wanted to learn more. And I love that idea of someone that wants to continue to grow no matter how old they are. And maybe the way we grow is going to be different. Maybe the way we serve is going to be different. But God calls us always to grow. He says, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it. Creation is part of God's plan. He creates us to work together. He creates the church to partner with one another. And this is exactly what Jesus did in His mission. Jesus, after He's risen from the dead, He tells His disciples in John chapter 20, verse 20. He says, after He showed them His hands and His sides, the disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. And again Jesus said, peace be with you. As the Father sent me, I am sending you. From the beginning, God says, be fruitful, multiply, show others that they are made in the image of God. That was God's mission from the beginning. It didn't begin when Jesus gave the Great Commission. It's always been God's mission to show that we are called to bring others to Christ, to show who our God is. And Jesus says, just as God sent me to this world, I'm now sending you on this mission. And that's what the church is all about. We're called to do it together. See, when my friend down the road had his little game system, the most there were 2-player games, and there weren't a whole lot of them. So we would just wait and see if we could get invited into the game. But in today's world, there's something called MMO, massively multiplayer online, meaning that there are games where people can all participate at the same time. And what I believe God is doing is He's handing the controls to those in the church. He's handing the controls to those who have been made in His likeness. And He says, all of you are invited into this. And for you gamers out there, I'll give you a little thing where I changed the MMO to massively missional outreach. Meaning it's not just the preacher that's called to reach out. It's not just the elders or deacons. It's all of us. To reach out to those in this world. To have this outreach. To have this missional idea where we're inviting others into a relationship with God. We're inviting them into creation. And so this week, I'm going to give you 3 things that we can look at in how we can practice massive missional outreach. First thing is, find someone that you can have a meaningful conversation about your faith. Maybe that's a family member. Maybe that's a coworker. Maybe that's someone in your school. But something simple, and start listening for context clues of someone that's searching for something more. Or someone that's going through a hard time, and you can tell them a little story of your faith. Think about doing that this week. Secondly, we are called to do this together. God has called us to join Him in His creation. He's called us to partner with one another. And so find ways that you don't just serve on your own, but you can serve with others in God's church. And lastly, invite someone to church. Invite someone to small group. Invite someone to class. There's no better time to invite someone than next Sunday at our chili cook-off and bundt cake cook-off. It's an easy invitation. And they will enjoy it. It's one of the best Sunday evenings that we have here. It's a time of fellowship. It's a time where we can devote ourselves to God in His Word and enjoy the company of our brothers and sisters in Christ. God's invited you into creation. He's invited you into His image. He's invited you into a life with Him. And one of the things that He invites us to do is to give our lives to Him. And we can give our lives to Him through baptism. We can die to ourselves and be raised with Him to where we live with Him eternally. If you haven't made that decision, there's no better time to answer that invitation. Or, if you've already answered that, realize that was just the beginning. We're called to grow. If we can help you in any way, please come while we stand and sing.